And let's address some of those problems here and think about how we might then add to the system so that we can add another term that will hopefully help us to clarify or see some of the problems that we might be facing. So objective, introduce a new modal distance interval naming system that uses distance and modal centers. So this is going to be just the common sense way. You might look at that and say, oh no, he's talking about modes and this is going to be confusing. He's doing some master class or something going way beyond what we no, I'm talking about measuring like a plumber would measure pipe or something, like the normal way to measure things. If you have the common sense way of measuring, that's what I'm talking about. This is the easy way to do it that we will then tie in and bridge to the current system so that we can see what the current system is doing and also be able to see what it's doing from a simplistic normal measurement standard. Thesis, the traditional scale degree system obscures logic and clarity. The modal distance naming system retains all of the benefits while correcting core issues. Now, if you're learning music theory, you're probably thinking, there's gotta be a reason. There's gotta be. And you've been looking, this cannot be the most optimal thing, but I'm trusting the system. But then if you look at it for long enough, you're like, no, you can do everything with a more simple system, really. So part of the reason, as we've seen in prior presentation, that the current system is the way the current system is because of the order in which ideas and tools have been developed throughout history. Which means that if we were to reorganize things at this point in time, having all the tools laid out on our table, we would come up with something better, more efficient, most likely. So that's kind of like the explanation on why this is the case and why you might want to look at it now, in particular because we have tools such as a ChatGPT and other AI tools allowing easy conversion and to really check these ideas. If you disagree with any of my ideas here, copy the transcript of this thing, put it into a ChatGPT or AI, ask it if what I'm saying makes sense or not. Here is our fretboard. We have the low or heavy E string on top. I'm going to be repeating this analogy over and over because I think it's the optimal way to be visualizing things and it leads in perfectly to this measurement issue. So what's the best way to be visualizing the fretboard? I'm going to say it's a map of the territory, similar to the globe. Here's our globe down below. And like on the globe, we're going to say that there are 7 continents, 7 destination locations. Now there's actually 12 locations on the fretboard, but the non-continents, the 5 non-continents, we're going to say that those are like the oceans. Those are the things that we go through, not the ones that we're going to basically want to be landing on. If we take our perspective from space, we're up here above the fretboard. Our head is looking down on the fretboard. We are in space. We can imagine the fretboard is rotating to the right, like the world, like the globe rotating around. We're going to give it 12 degrees of rotation, naming those 12 degrees of rotation based on the notes in the musical alphabet. And now we're usually going to be working in the collection of notes related to the key of C. However, the whole thing would shift forward. If I went to C sharp, to D sharp, this whole thing would shift forward. All the relative positions would remain the same, just as you can imagine all the relative positions on the globe remain the same as it spins around from your perspective in space. So that means once I know the perspective I'm looking at, I no longer want to name them, the notes, by note name. I want to name them by the continent names, which is equivalent to the Nashville number system if you have used that system. The Nashville number system basically simply just using a number for the node locations, the Ionian, the Phrygian, the Lydian, the Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. That is the most optimal way to be visualizing the guitar, to open up the guitar most easily, not only in one key, but be able to shift through all 12 keys and rotate through all modes in all 12 keys. Now there's a problem with that, and that is that the current naming convention is based on scale degrees and based on using the major scale as our reference point, as we have seen, right? So it's using our measurement term of scale degrees, which is going to force us to rename terms as we talk about distances, as we build chords. We want to recognize that so that I can try to break down the relevant information of the name, which is simply distance, not scale degrees, so it doesn't make me or force me to think I have to rename the fretboard, give me a misunderstanding of where I am within the continents on the fretboard. That's going to be our general idea, our general problem. We also, in our term, measure everything or compare everything to the major scale. So in other words, you'll note that the intervals will either have a major, a minor, a perfect, or an augmented or a diminished term within them. What happened there? Basically, we compared everything to the major scale, and everything that didn't fit into the interval of the major scale, we called something else, like a minor or an augmented or a diminished. That's really kind of like a unit of measure. That's like saying my foot, I'm going to compare everything to how long my foot is, and that's going to be my unit of measure. We don't need that other unit of measure, however, because we're already using 2 units of measure, which is more than enough, which is going to be the half steps, as well as what I'm going to call the modal distance, which you can also call the scale degree distance. So in other words, if I'm measuring from this point, then I would call this, from a Nashville number system, the 5th or the Mixolydian mode. So I don't need to call it the first. If I want to go from here to here, how far is that? It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 notes away, but the term typically used is a major third. Well, if I say major third, that would imply that this is the first, which is not what I want to do. I want to keep that as the continent number 5, Mixolydian continent, and it would also imply that we're in the major scale, because it's a major fourth away, but we're not. If we're going to use scale terminology, we would be in the Mixolydian scale, measuring from this point. So that those are confusions that are introduced into our mind, which shouldn't be introduced into our mind, but for the confusion of the name that is in place. What would be a better system? If it would be better if I just used the unit of measure from this point. It's a 4 node away from this node, the Mixolydian node, or instead of using scale degrees, it's 1, 2 modal half steps, or units away within the collection of notes. So instead of calling it a scale, it's a collection of notes that's in order. I can measure from any of those nodes. It's basically a circle that goes around in a circle, but I can measure from any of the nodes within the circle. So if we take our continent kind of concept here and we apply it to the fretboard, this is what I first applied it to. This is position 5 through 8. And this is what I would call position number 1. That's why I applied it out here first. I just took the continents and applied it out. So we had North America, Europe, Asia, South America, Africa, Australia, and then Antarctica. Now, in between those continents, we have the oceans, the ones that we're not going to be spending a lot of time on, but might touch on as pass-through notes as we're moving to the continents. So here's an ocean here, an ocean out here, an ocean here, here, and here. So we have 5 oceans within our example that kind of maps roughly on a global idea. Now note, when I pull this into practice of actual measurements, we want to put this more in a circle format. So if we're measuring distance, there's 2 ways that we want to be visualizing it. One is we have a clock kind of format, so we're going to measure it as we go around in a circle. And the other is that we have like a note number line that goes infinitely up at this point. We could also go backwards. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, it's going infinitely up, let's imagine. So that makes the map even easier for us to think about, because instead of us being able to cross the middle of the map to go from South America to Asia or something like that, I can only go around in a circle. We have a block kind of format. So that's going to be easier for us to visualize. So if I look at a clock face, let's start at the 2 right here. I'm starting in South America, which is the 2 in our example, and I want to go to the 5. There's 2 ways I can do that distance-wise. I can count from continent to continent, 1, 2, 3. It would be 3 continents up that way. Now notice what the scale degrees are doing. The scale degrees are making continent 1 or continent 2, continent 1. I would measure this as the 1, like the first inch in our, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be the 4th scale degree up. That's not how you normally measure. How you normally measure is from that point, 1, 2, 3. So the concept we're going to introduce is modal half steps, which are like continent to continent. There's 3 steps up from this node. I don't need to rename the node to measure 3 steps up. Then if I also want to add the oceans, which aren't in between each note, they're going to be in between some of the notes, which we'll talk about more when we get to the examples, but that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 5 total distance, including the oceans, which would be equivalent to the note distance up, and 1, 2, 3 modal half steps up. So that's going to be the measurement term ideas that we have. Now note that we can also go backwards. We can go 1, 2, 3, 4 negative modal half steps going counterclockwise around the clock. Note from a scale degree that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Negative 5 scale degree. But we don't usually do scale degrees going backwards. So that's another place where the interval terminology falls apart, because when we go in reverse order, we don't really have a term for that. We'll get into that in a second, but just another problem to kind of introduce here.